This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, for those of you that have joined us, just give us 1 minute. We'll get started here. So sit back and we'll start in a minute or two. Okay, for those of you that are joining us tonight, just give us 1 minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. So sit back and relax. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello there, I'm Derek. I'm one of the reference librarians here at the Hudson Library. So a couple little note-keeping things and then we'll introduce the author. We have a couple programs that you may be interested in. On Tuesday, November 1st at 7 p.m., we have the historian John Meacham, who's going to join us via Zoom and talk about his latest book, And Then There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggles. That's November 1st at 7 p.m. Monday, November 7th at 6 p.m., which is a special time, we're going to have with us the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, Tristan Hunt. And he's the author of his latest book, The Radical Potter, The Life and Times of Josiah Wedgwood. So if you're interested in those programs or any other, go to hudsonlibrary.org to sign up. So we'd like to thank the Learn It Out, which is our local bookseller here at Hudson, to have books available. This here, Crecy. So if you would like to purchase that book, in the right-hand side there'll be a link, and you can buy that book from Learn It Out. So if you have questions for our author, we will field them later on tonight. So if you do have them, don't be shy. There'll be a little Q&A thing at the bottom, and then I'll ask them. So speaking of our author here, tonight we have Dr. Michael Livingston, and he'll be talking about his newest book, Crecy, The Battle of the Five Kings. He has a BA in history from Baylor University and an MA in medieval studies from Western Michigan University, both an MA and a PhD in English from the University of Rochester. He's the author of numerous books such as Never a Greater Slaughter, Brandenburg, which in November will be in paperback. Also, he's the co-author of The Battle of Crécy, which is referenced in this book, the Case Book, forthcoming in November. We talked about this. If you're a Wheel of Fans fan, like I am, there'll be The Origins of Wheel of Time in November. He serves as the Secretary General for the U.S. Commission of Military History and sits on the board for the South Carolina Academy of Authors. And speaking of South Carolina, he's a full-time professor at the Citadel down there. And you can follow him, like I do, on Medieval Guy on Twitter. So now I'll turn it over to you.
Well, hi, everybody. So I'm so glad you're all here. This is great. I'm excited. I see there's like 46. Wow, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. I wish we were doing this in person, just so we could high five and such. But since we can't, you get this. Be in my office under this beautiful light to talk about my book. And there's a lot in the book. I don't want to bore everybody with talking about everything. But I thought I would kind of hit the highlight, as it were, the thing that seems to get the most press, which is this question of where the battle was fought. And if in Q&A you want me to talk about other aspects of this, I certainly can. But I definitely want to foreground that particular issue because it is, I think, the most accessible matter in this book, and a thing that kind of makes a big difference to a lot of folks. So if you don't know, and there's really no reason why you would, the Battle of Crécy was fought in 1346. This is the first major land war in France, or land battle, I should say, in France, of the 100 Years' War. There had been some earlier skirmishes. There was a naval battle, but this is the big first battle that people kind of remember. So this is quite a ways before the Battle of Agincourt, which I think is probably the most famous battle of the 100 Years' War. That's in 1415. So that's quite a long time to come for that. This is the first one, Crecy. The 100 Years' War, I have the dates there, 1337 to 1453. That's the accepted dates for it. I actually, I'm not quite sure I would give it those dates myself, but that's the accepted timeline for the 100 Years' War. As you can see, it was more than 100 years. So it had that going for it. This is England versus France. At Crecy, in the initial parts, it's King Edward III of England versus King Philippe VI of France. And this really is a fight between these two men, politically, but personally as well, because the origin point of this, the bifurcation point, is that Edward had declared, for a number of reasons, that he was the rightful king of France. And Philippe VI, who happened to be the king of France, disagreed with that. He didn't think that was a great idea. He didn't want to give up his crown, and it came to blows. So there's lots of other things that are going on. There's economic impulses to this. There's ultimately very clear religious impulses to this. There's a lot of things that are pushing these two countries to war. And obviously, something that goes from 1337 to 1453, look, nobody who saw its beginning saw its end. And a war like that, kind of changes over time. It metastasizes. But at its core, the beginning, it's about this claim that Edward has made over the throne of France. And Crecy is the first big engagement. Now, you can see I've got a map here. This is a map from 1704. And this is the first map that I have found. Actually, should say has been found, because I didn't find it. One of my students did. One of my students found this, correcting me in the middle of a lecture, which was fantastic. I was like A for the day, dude, because I said in a lecture when the oldest map was. And he was like, no, I found one that's a little bit earlier than that, 1704. So we helped him publish that, which was very, very cool. But 1704, you can see here, I've got it boxed in red. There's Crecy, the town. Here's the forest of Crecy. That'll come up later. And there you can see 1346, 26th of August. There's a little sword there marking the location of Crecy. Now, I'm going to sort of get into this traditional location before kind of stepping out of it. Here is the always reliable Wikipedia. It's a joke for everybody. This is the Wikipedia map of the Battle of Crécy. Very nice, though it misspells several things, but it's Wikipedia. What are you going to do? This shows the traditional idea of this, that you have the English, which are in blue over here. Edward III has taken position just north of the town of Crecy. This is the River May here, not Mave. I don't know what's going on there. It should be a Y. This is the River May. He's on this high ground to the north, and Philippe VI is believed by people to have come on this side, on the north side here, and attacks. Genoese crossbowmen go in first. We might talk about that later. And then the successive waves of cavalry and infantry come in, and basically all the French die right in front of the English position here. So that is the traditional way this is viewed. That's the way I was taught this battle. It's the way I believed this was until just a few years ago. It's the way we all kind of thought it was. Now, this is a slightly different way of looking at that same area. This is a heat map, an elevation heat map. So hot is high ground, cold is low ground. So you can see the high ground is this kind of whitish pink area up kind of near the top here. And then you've got, of course, the River May is on low ground. And there's this valley in between. And that's the valley where everybody believes that the battle took place. I've just put in some lines here, the red traditional English line and the blue traditional French line. And as you saw in the previous slide, the idea of them just kind of going straight across into the English lines. That was the tradition. Well, one problem with that is that there is, I've marked it in gray here, kind of thin line, an escarpment that sits at one side of that valley. It's actually a glacial pullback, as a glacier way back in the Ice Age pulled back. It scoured this out, and there's a drop off there, a substantial drop off, enough that if you charged down that hillside on horseback, your horses would all buckle at that point. Their front legs would break. It would be a disaster. So you couldn't do a straight charge from this traditional French line into the traditional English line. It doesn't really function that way. And so the idea was sort of developed, if you will, that the French went through the space between the end of this escarpment and the River May and made this kind of funky S turn so that they could charge up into the English lines and effectively die, which is a terrible plan. This is a bottleneck. You wouldn't want to do that. And you wouldn't do this, even if you did this, you wouldn't do this more than once. Whereas we know the Battle of Crécy goes for hours and hours and hours, wave after wave. And in addition to all that, the roads in the area are kind of along the high ground up here. And you can see I've sort of shaded in a blue arrow that would show what the French obviously would do in that situation, which is just follow the road around and come up the flank of the English and destroy them, win the battle. Piece of cake. Why go downhill through a bottleneck and make a weird S turn and then climb uphill so that you can get slaughtered? So this has a sort of problem to it. This doesn't like make a lot of sense. And this is one of the first clues that we had that this battle has been very much misunderstood. Now, I've just really quickly shown here in kind of faded coloring over here, the idea of rotating the whole thing. This is a fairly recently, a colleague of mine trying to defend the traditional site has come up with this. Well, if you rotate it, you don't have this problem, which is true. But then you have the problem of the French charging through a river, and nobody says that happened. The river is not mentioned. The escarpment isn't mentioned. None of our sources mention anything like this. So all of this is based on, again, somebody marked this location on a map, and everybody's just accepted it ever since. But there's problems with it. And it's not just those problems. So when I began looking into the Battle of Crécy, one of the things that I was extremely excited to find out existed that people hadn't really looked at is what you're seeing right here, which is a very long roll. It's held in the National Archives in England, and it is, we call it the Kitchen Journal. It's literally like a list of receipts, an account kept by the guy who's in charge of the king's kitchen, basically recording like, this is how much meat was eaten, here's how much fish was eaten. Like, it's receipts. But like any receipt that you know of that you could pull out of your pocket, it says where you are, right? You know, this is the store where you bought the thing. It gives an address. Essentially the same thing here. The person keeping charge of this account recorded where they were upon making these expenditures for the kitchen. And that enabled me to construct what you're looking at here, which is an amazing itinerary, dated itinerary of where every stop was. And the result of doing this for the entirety of the campaign is to get an average marching speed, which is about 1.3 kilometers per hour. That's the average marching speed that Edward III and the English army were managing across this campaign. And the best speed that they'd done is, as you can see, 2.2 kilometers per hour. That was the best that they'd done. Now here, zoomed in again on the actual site of Crecy. You can see in red there, that's that traditional site circled. There's the big forest. And I've marked the 2 nights previous campsites. Those are the previous 2 nights before the battle. From that last camp, which is the kind of upper of these purple camps here, the English army needs to march to the field of battle and then begin the battle. That happens on the next day. Well, the distance between that spot and the traditional side of the battle is 21 kilometers. And they had to fight the battle that day. They only had about 5 hours to get there, which would be a marching speed of 4.2 kilometers per hour, which is a lot. That's a lot. It's pretty much undoable to do that and then be fighting a battle is pretty insane. So this too literally kind of didn't add up, right? This was another reason to feel like there's a problem with the traditional site. We need to look somewhere else. And I said, it's just one of the problems. So I've just listed the stuff here. It's too far away. It's identified very late, 1704 versus 1346. That's the difference from the Battle of Hastings to Leonardo da Vinci. Like, that's a big scope of time. No source describes fighting on or through the River May. No source describes that escarpment. No source describes the seizure of the town of Crecy, now today called Crécy-en-Ponthieu. No source describes that, but to fight a battle just above it on the north side, Edward would have had to do that. No source does that. It doesn't make any sense of the actions or logistics before or after the battle on the French side. Doesn't make sense of where the roads are. And tellingly, no evidence has been found on that site. So there ought to be thousands of artifacts given a battle of this size, and there's none. And this feels like a real problem. A real problem. When you add all this up, it's really hard to think that's where it happened. So in other words, our Wikipedia map, no, that's not right. That's not right. Shocking everybody. That's not right. And if it's not there, then where was it? And this becomes then the big question, is where was this battle? And that's what kind of sent me going down the fun rabbit hole to figure this question out, or to come up with an alternative point of view. This painting, by the way, I love this painting. This is Julian's Story. It's a painting that's actually just down the road from me in Savannah. Big painting of the aftermath of the Battle of Crécy. This is the Black Prince, as it's called, the Crown Prince of England, who was there at the fight. He was not all dressed in black like this. That's not why he was called the Black Prince. He was actually 16 years old at this fight. And one of the first big stories that comes up about the Battle of Crécy is how after the battle, he found the King of Bohemia, who's one of the 5 kings of the battle, dead upon the field, and was very moved by this. King John of Bohemia had been, at this point, basically blind, and had asked that he be taken into the fight so that he could die in battle, and indeed he did. So that's what this is depicting in a very kind of almost pre-Raphaelite way. It's beautiful. I love it. It's totally inaccurate, but I love it anyway. So that's what I use there. So how did I start going about this process? Well, the first big thing was collecting sources. And this is what the Battle of Crécy, a casebook, which was mentioned in the intro, this is what this was all about, getting all the sources together. You can actually, the first one that I have in this list, this is just a snapshot from one of my many spreadsheets of this work. That's the Kitchen Journal. The author of that, we actually found out, William Retford was the name of that guy. But this is the first of 18 out of 100 easy sources. And what I'm keeping track of in this particular bit of spreadsheet is, where do they say the battle happened? I end up getting into lots of questions in this book and in this research. How was the battle fought? How many people were there? All kinds of questions. But as for now, as I said, I'm just going to look at, where was it fought? And putting together all this information was extremely telling. Now I have to say, and we can talk about this in Q&A if you want or whatever. Dealing with sources, these are written by people. This is my favorite quote of all when I'm talking about historical things. This was given to me as an undergraduate at Baylor studying history. I love this quote. No document can tell us more than what the author of the document thought, what he thought had happened, what he thought ought to happen or would happen, or perhaps only what he wanted others to think he thought, or even only what he himself thought he thought, which is a wonderful way of saying, look, every source has the potential to be biased or to be wrong. And we have to kind of work with these sources relative to one another, relative to other strands of information that we have, whether that's topography or weather, or who knows what the other sources of confirmation or denial we might be able to access. But just because someone says something happened doesn't necessarily mean it happened. We want to look at these things in their totality. As I like to put it to my students, we triangulate, right? And I always use the example of an earthquake, right? No instrument is really on the earthquake. All the instruments are relative to that event and are giving us data, describing it essentially relative to that event. And it's only when we kind of put them all together can we see, oh, that's the reality of the event. That's where it was. That's how big it was, etc. We do the same thing with historical sources. We have all of these sources and we triangulate their information to find the best fit for that information, the thing that's going to make the most sense of the evidence. In the case of Crecy, in trying to look for an alternative site, the sources are really, really clear. They give us amazingly concise directions. Across the board, we are told the battle happened between Abbeville, the town of Abbeville, and the town of Crécy-en-Ponthieu, that it was fought on the way to the town of Crécy-en-Ponthieu. And of course, if you remember, the traditional site is actually beyond Crécy-en-Ponthieu. The English would have had to seize that city and then go beyond it. And all of our sources instead say it was on the way, like they hadn't gotten there yet. It was between these two towns. They tell us that it was beside the forest of Crecy, that in fact, calling it the Battle of Crécy it looks like mostly a reference to the fact that it's associated with the forest, not necessarily with the town. It's the forest that is the big dominating feature. Many of the sources don't say anything about the towns. They just say it's beside the forest, including the Kitchen Journal, which is recording where they were every day. It says we were by the forest of Crecy. So this is like consistent information we're getting again and again and again. From the distances, I would approximate we should be 11 to 13 kilometers of march from the previous encampment, which gives us essentially a kind of a search radius that we can, look for candidates. We're told that it's on the Mont of Crecy, the mount, the high ground of Crecy, which is again probably referring to the mount, high ground that the forest is on. And ideally, we want to follow the roads. This is something that I have really, really become convinced of. Not that it should be a hard thing to be convinced of, which is that, look, if you're moving thousands and thousands of men and horses and wagons and livestock, you need roads. And if we are not paying attention to where the roads run, we're missing a very key piece of information that is necessary for the past. So this is just, there's lots of stuff, but I'm kind of keeping it all more succinct. So these are clues. These are basic clues, right? Like, how do we triangulate from this? What can we do? Well, here I've shown this, version of this map before here, right? We see the town of Abbeville in the south and the town of Crécy-en-Ponthieu, both I've circled in purple. Why I chose purple, I don't know. And the battle site should be between them. If our sources are correct, it should be between them. You can see the traditional site is to the north. I've marked the major roads. I've highlighted those here. And I've shown the path followed by the English in red. The little circles are the previous campsites. And the road that it looks like they follow to get to the battle site. And doing the sort of same thing on the French side, we get to a point they kind of run into each other, which is right beside the forest of Crecy, in the correct distance from the previous campsite, is following the main road, or getting onto the main road and starting to follow it that appears to be the English destination. They're trying to march to a town called Hesdin, which is up this green highlighted road. So this is the road they want to get on, the road they want to follow. And it's the road that the French want to cut them off from. They don't want to let them go any further. And so the French have gotten around via these other main roads, gotten around them to get in front of them, cut them off. And that's the reason the battle happens. This wasn't a battle that the English were deliberately seeking to fight on this place. It was where they got caught, where they got kind of run down, in the hunt, got pinned in, and the battle happened. So this alternative site then became very intriguing to me. This fits all of our evidence. Well, what happens when I zoom in on this more closely? What do I see? And this again is where what evidence can we have? Like, what evidence can we get into? And I go through a lot of evidence in the book. This is just one of them. This is what's called a cadastral map. So it's essentially Napoleonic age. This was done in 1832 specifically. because of what Napoleon had done as far as changing how taxation worked and land ownership, it became necessary to figure out what the parcels of land were and who owned them across France. And so the survey teams went out and did field surveys, in very precise, like scientific, like field surveys, and recorded it all in the 1830s, all across France. It's amazing. And so that, like, this in 1832, these are the fields. Like, this is how they were broken down in that alternative site that I identified, right? So I'm going to flash back here. So again, if I zoom in on where my little alternative site label is, when I zoom in on that, this is what you start seeing in the maps. And you can see all these words on it. Those are the place names. Those are the names that people called those fields in 1832. And this is obviously before, modern roads are being put in. It's a pretty clean snapshot. Now, it's 1832. It's obvious. I wish I was older. I wish I had older maps, but I don't. You saw the kind of detail that was in the previous map in 1704. That's as detailed a map as you can get in 1704. We don't have more detail when we go further back than that. And we certainly don't get this kind of detail until these maps exist. But what they do show that's very interesting to me, there's a number of these place names are fascinating. The one that struck me first when I was first looking at this was the top one there in purple, which says the hearse. And this is HERSE, not funeral business, but a hearse, which is a word that was kind of rather famously associated with Crecy and how it was fought, and that there was a formation on the hearse, or a formation of the hearse. It was always kind of confusing about what's being described here. The other one that I've put in purple is the Garden of the Genoese, which when I saw that, I thought, well, that's interesting. There shouldn't be Genoese gardening in northern France. That doesn't make any sense. But the first wave of the French that went in at the Battle of Crécy were Genoese crossbowmen, and they were very famously like really, really cut down. They suffered enormous losses when the first line of the Genoese went in. Pretty famously horrific what happened to them. And in fact, this spot, the Garden of the Genoese, if a battle was fought in this place, that's where they would have been cut down. This is where they would have fallen, which is quite a coincidence, I thought. Quite a coincidence. So this is actually a picture of that site, a site that is today called, I didn't highlight it there, it's called the Mont of Crecy, right beside the Forest of Crecy. This is me in a younger age. The English position would have been on this high ground that's behind me, and there is this kind of sharp hill. Again, it's actually another glacial pullback, and this is the field, the Garden of Genoese. This is where all of those men would have died in the first wave, and it would have been a terrific position. It's actually a depression. You can't see this from the French side. You wouldn't know that the ground kind of went down right in front of the English position, which would make it a superb place to trap the enemy and ultimately destroy them. So this is what you can see, the Garden of the Genoese. This is a picture that I just turned sideways and took. And this would be looking towards the advance of the Genoese. And the lip of ground is this kind of difference in coloration there. That's the lip that if you were coming up towards this position, you'd see men kind of drop out of sight as they came over that lip. And then they're in this area. You wouldn't actually know what was happening to them until somebody got out of the situation, was able to tell you that, it's a killing ground. But until that happened, you wouldn't know. So you would probably continue to send more men in, which is in fact what we get in the Battle of Crécy, which is this line after line going in to their doom as if they don't know what's happening. This, I've got serious doubts about this, but this is actually a ditch that is just around the road from this side. That's my good friend and colleague Kelly DeVries, who wrote the Battle of Crécy casebook with me. So there's that is a Kelly versus the ditch. Whether this is the English ditch that some sources describe the English digging, I kind of don't. I suspect not in the shape that it is now. I think subsequent digging would have taken place, whether it was for local lime deposits or something else. But it is in the right spot for that's described. And this is looking south across the field, and the big red arrow there, that's pointing down towards that Garden of the Genoese. The ditch is hidden in the trees here, and the French position to the left, English position to the right, and the French position from where I am. It would be kind of a big, kind of crescent shape here as they were trying to come at the English. So all of a sudden, things are clicking into place. This is now making sense of what happened there. This is from the French lines below, and again, you can see the line of trees. That's where the English would be up there. You can't see that there's that depression. You can't tell. So they would march up in full confidence that they were coming right into the English, and instead had to drop down and were getting hit by longbow arrows from above. So when you kind of put all this together, if this is the right spot, now it's all clicking together. And then I move to the sources and start trying to reconstruct, well, does this fit the sources? Yes, it fits them extremely well. Does this fit the actions that are described? Yes, it fits them extremely well, and starts to now explain the things that didn't make any sense before, right? Why for hours and hours are the French going in to die in plain view on the traditional site? Well, that's not what's happening. It's instead they're going in and don't know what's going on, and it's happening across a bigger frontage where not everybody can see what's happening across the lines. So this is the reconstruction that I used in the new book, Crecy, the Battle of Five Kings. And in essence, what I am arguing here is the English take position first on the Mont de Crecy. You can see it labeled there beside the Forest of Crecy, which is what we're told that they do. This is a topo map. So this is high ground, and then we're going to low ground. The main roads here, you can see the roads, follow the roads. The English would have come up this road, taken position on the high ground that they could, knowing that they'd been cut off by the French. And what they do is create a wagonburg, it's called. It's a field fortification of essentially taking their wagons, circling the wagons essentially, but they turn them on their side so that they kind of make a wall of wood that you can then kind of be behind as an archer. And they make this wagonburg to further protect their position from charges. They're worried about a cavalry charge, and then put archers in wings to either side behind the wagons, and then in these extended wings. And you can see those wings are up against the forest. There's a small forest over here called the Bois de Bout and the Forest of Crecy. Edward III uses the pinched-in area between these to fortify, and his flanks are protected. You can't come through the forest at him. So he just walls off the front and rear, and he's now completely surrounded and protected in that regard. And his archers in the forest, you won't know that they're there, but there's thousands of archers in these wings who then, if say you're the Genoese, which is this lower blue line, who come marching up into the Garden of the Genoese, what becomes, I think, the Garden of the Genoese as a result of this. When they come in, they don't know that there is an entire line of longbowmen immediately to their left, and longbowmen, of course, in front of them behind these turned wagons. And so when the order to fire goes, order to loose more specifically, goes for the longbowmen on the English side, it would have been absolute destruction, which is what we hear about, that this is what happens. And they then flee. But in fleeing, run into the first wave of the French cavalry, who are driving in probably having come down a different road. They're driving in to hit behind the crossbowman. The crossbowman will go in and shoot all of these bolts and kind of roll out of the way. And now here comes the cavalry that's going to smash through now that it's been softened up. But instead, what happens, because of all these longbowmen and this hidden depression, the Genoese get pummeled, try and flee the way they came, only to run directly into this line of charging French knights, which then the lines, of course, just dissolve into chaos, which makes a great mass that's easier to keep, throwing longbow arrows into, thus killing more men and causing a sort of cycling effect. So this is the first phase of the battle, is what happens on the south side, as when at last King Philippe realizes what is happening, he orders then a full line advance at the English position, which is what I'm trying to show here in phase 2, which is they come charging fully. Now the arrows are funneling them into the center, and it's at that point that the French are aiming to try and break through the English center, where the English have a gap in this Wagenburg controlled by their dismounted knights in a line. And the plan, I firmly believe, was, come at this opening, come at our knights. Edward put his son, the Black Prince, 16 years old, with his banner, very clearly, bait, right in the middle of that line, come at me. And the plan was, take the charge, but the charge may not get there because all these longbowmen are going to be shooting and hitting the French as they charge. And it's at that point, one of the other things we found out, the Black Prince gets captured. And what appears to have happened is that he rushed forward, seeing the French going down in front of him, whether it was greed or lust for glory, he rushed out to try and, get a piece of the fight. And in doing so, caused the longbow archers, the English longbow archers, could no longer just shoot kind of willy-nilly into the crowd. You can't hit your own men. God help you if you shoot the crown prince in the back. That's not good. And in the melee, the chaos of the melee, the Black Prince is captured and only barely is able to escape. In that moment, the 100 Years' War was effectively over with the Black Prince captured, but he manages to get away. It looks like he mostly gets away because the French start bickering and arguing over who's going to claim the ransom on him, who's going to get the great reward for this. And that buys enough time for a contingent of English to come in and grab the kid and yank him back out into safety. And at that point, the French begin to be repulsed, pushed back, and the fight continues all the way to nightfall. It is an absolutely horrible event in terms of the loss of life. It's widely regarded as one of the great glories of English history, English military history in particular. Winston Churchill said it was one of the 4 greatest achievements of the English military. But it, in a kind of frank way, it was an awful event. And even if you survived it, it would have been an enormous level of trauma that you would have experienced. And that's honestly just the first day. The second day, there's actually a day 2 of the battle that most people ignore. So again, I did lots of stuff in the book, but I thought, well, let's just kind of look at this one thing, keep it simple, and yeah, I can take questions for anything you've got.
Okay, so that sounds great here. So don't forget, you can use the Q&A at the bottom there to ask some questions. So our first question talks about something we probably all know, especially you, Dr. Livingston, the Bayeux Tapestry. So our first question is there any art that was created during the time or maybe a little bit after to sort of talk about this victory for the British?
Great question. Yeah, the Bayeux Tapestry, which is for the Battle of Hastings in 1066, which is amazing. You've got to see it if you ever go to Bayeux. There's plenty of art that is done of the battle, including the cover art you can see right there. And that's supposedly the Battle of Crécy. So not terribly helpful, right? This is not Bayeux Tapestry level of kind of detail and information. The main way that you're getting that instead is descriptive in chronicles and accounts and in poetry. In fact, I lead off the book talking about a poem that historians had ignored. It boggles my mind that it was ignored, because it's the most powerful poem of the medieval period I've ever read. That was written by a French herald, a guy sort of in charge of identifying coats of arms and who people were. It appears to be within like 3 days of the battle. He writes this on the field. He's called in to identify the French dead, and he writes a poem about that experience. It's hundreds of lines long. It's gorgeous. I mean, it's horrifying, but it's like beautiful poetry of him trying to come to terms with what he has seen, what he's experienced. He was in the battle, what he lived through, and now recognizing that of the thousands of men that have died and need prayers said for their souls, he could only identify 33. And that's the largest list that anybody has. He identifies more dead than anybody. And so it's absolutely astonishing. It describes the capture of the Black Prince. It describes the death of King John of Bohemia. It's amazing. So yeah, it's not visual, the way Bay Tapestry is, but it is definitely descriptive and gives us all that kind of stuff that we would like. Great question.
Okay, great. So I'm sure you probably get this all the time, so I'm going to be the one to ask it about the longbow. Why does this get so much love in English history and British history? And was it the superstar of this battle, or are we getting a little too far ahead in British history?
Yeah, so the longbow is an amazing thing, and it has its tremendous pull. It has a pretty good rate of fire, even though there's no gunpowder involved, but a rate of fire. So it is a very powerful weapon, and it does play an enormous role here. I think people get carried away with the longbow. I think especially English historians do, because to them it's nationalistic. This is something that is kind of part of their culture and their pride and their glory at Crecy and at Agincourt. And yes, it plays a role, but as I like to say, it's not a machine gun. It's a bow. It's a bow and arrow. I mean, the French have bows too. Like, yeah, it's a longbow. It's got a little bit more range. It has a lot of utility, and I don't want to denigrate that. But it does get a little bit carried away, that people think, well, you have the longbow, you can't be defeated now. It's really longbow plus position plus topography. Like, that's what makes the difference here. The longbow alone wouldn't do it. But yeah, it is a key element, and it is one of the more famous elements because English nationalism.
So one of the things you talked about is the French and the British, for a lack of a better term, sort of running into each other. How were the French able to just walk into the field and get slaughtered? Did they not reconnoiter the area? Did they not have scouts, or was it just the fog of war?
The fog of war is a big part of this. They had reconnoitered the area. The scouts had said that's where the English are, and so that's the reason that the French are coming down these roads to come at them. Part of it is cockiness. The French had way more men. They're much better rested, better fed. They're in better shape, and they've got the English pinned down. Why does this happen? Well, they lose command and control. Is a major part of this. That the King Philippe lost the ability to control what's happening on the field and to know everything's happening on the field. They don't have walkie-talkies or anything like that. It's a little bit more difficult to do in a pre-modern age. And they went in, though they probably shouldn't have. They probably should have just, like, you're not going to go anywhere. Stay here for a while, starve. Like, what do we care? Instead of going in as quickly as they possibly could. And in fact, some of the French generals were advising just that. They were saying, no, we don't need to go in. It's like 3 PM at this point. No, man, just let's just camp out. They're not going anywhere. They're only going to get weaker day by day. We might get even stronger as more men show up. So let's just wait. But it's hard to convince, especially when people kind of get their get their dander up and they're like, we're going to do this. It's hard to get them to pull back and to think in rational terms. And I think that's kind of what happens here is that kind of hot-headedness, that need for glory, well, we're going to win. Let's go, rah, 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 rah. And they go in and, to their destruction.
Okay, we have a more than a couple questions. Everybody interested in the alternative or real site or whatever you want to call it. So the site that you talk about in your book, has anybody done any archaeology and looking for artifacts? Has anything been found? It's kind of farm field.
It's the best question. This is the best question. And it's the question I wish I had better news. So unlike in England, in England, I can go to a farmer and say, hey, look, I want to do a dig in your backyard. And if they say, yeah, go for it, well, we can do it. And, if we find stuff, it's 50-50 split and that's it. It's not a problem. In France, the French government owns the ground and what's under it. And so you can't do a dig without permission of the French government. I'm not an archaeologist. The archaeologists I know who are desperate to dig this site, to survey this site and see if there's anything. I want them to do this very bad. And they're like, yeah, we keep getting the bureaucracy of France is not terribly interested in finding a new site for the Battle of Crécy, in which they lost really bad. So apparently that's kind of the big hang up at this point. But no, nothing's been dug there. If farmers have pulled stuff up, they have not told anybody. This would not be surprising. It's very atypical for farmers when they find things in their fields to tell people, because if they do, there's a very good chance that someone will come and shut down their farm, and they don't want that. That's how they make a living. So if they've pulled stuff up, they haven't said anything. And yeah, we're just hoping at some point that there's enough interest that they have to give permission for a dig. So great question. I wish I had positive news.
So one of the things I read up a little bit of British history here and there. When I was younger, I just thought it was, well, guys in armor, and later on it's tactics. And I realized that they had cannons during this time period and handguns and things like that. I don't know if it was necessarily prevalent in this battle, but could you maybe talk about that, and how did this happen on the battlefield? What was the effect of hearing a cannon go off?
Great question. This is the first battle where the English actually really used gunpowder. And there are some people who don't think there was any gunpowder there, but a lot of our sources say there were. What it would have been hand cannons. Don't think of huge artillery pieces, but something you can actually kind of, as a person, kind of carry around and stick one end in the ground and shoot. And what it is not, this isn't an artillery piece for mowing a hole in the personnel. It's not anti-personnel. It's certainly not anti-fortification or anything like that. It's basically like a big noisemaker. This thing makes a big loud boom, belches smoke and some fire. Yeah, projectile's going to fly out of it, and maybe that'll hit somebody. But really, it's the noise and the sort of dramatic effect of this that would terrify. The hope was the French cavalry. So if you're worried that the French have got this amazing cavalry and are going to come charging us, we need to stop it. Well, one way we'll have this wall of wagons that's going to help prevent them from getting through. We'll have all these longbow, and then we'll set off. It's like effectively massive firecrackers, that are going to make all this noise and spook the horses and spook the men, and again, kind of cause chaos. And the more we can disrupt the lines, the better chance we have at survival. See, this is the first time we really get this in a battle. I think it's, again, misunderstood just because we think of artillery kind of in one way, and it ultimately in warfare will get there. But at this point, it's really just noise and the smoke, just the shock of it, shock and awe that's going to spook the horses and the men.
So I have another question that's very popular, a little grisly, but after the battle, obviously it was just the detritus of war and the carnage and everything. But what happened afterwards? Obviously the bodies would get buried, but who got buried? What about the nobles? What about the arms and armor? Did that just sit there?
Oh man. So yeah, it is grisly. It is grisly. And and it's why I start with that poem that the French herald walking through all of this and trying to identify the dead. He's identifying the dead not via their corpses. He's identifying their insignia. So they'd gathered up shields that had somebody's coat of arms, or a surcoat that had their coat of arms, rings that had the coat of arms, anything that had that kind of insignia. That's what he's trying to identify, and he talks about it being torn up and bloodied and horrible. What happens to the gear? Well, the gear is largely stripped. They are that's money. It's worth money, and it's useful, right? You're an army, so more swords is good. Some of it was extremely valuable. John of Bohemia, the blind king who dies there, his corpse was ultimately taken to Luxembourg, which is where he was from, and was entombed there because he was noble, and so he got treated fancy. Well, his tomb was opened up, and we have photographs of what was left of him, and we're able to X-ray it and everything and see where his wounds were. And somebody had taken 5 strikes to try and take his right hand off, because his right hand was holding onto his sword, which would have been worth a lot of money. Probably had some rings on it too. So they tried to take that. So the bodies, like his, obviously, somebody was like not treating it well when he probably first went down. But as soon as anybody of higher rank recognized what was happening, they put a stop to that and then tried to treat the body well, because it was noble. So the nobles get taken off to be buried nicely. The regular crop of folks are either buried in a mass burial, or are in local graveyards, which would be pretty typical. You would often have, right after a battle, local monks would come in and pull the bodies, cart them off to bury them in holy ground. So unless they sanctified the ground of the battle site for a mass burial, they'd usually move them somewhere else. So after the Battle of Agincourt, we actually have this described, that they do a mass burial there, but the bishop sanctifies the ground so that these men's souls can go where they need to. So yeah, very much depended on who you were, and yeah, all the gear is taken away, scrapped, sold. You do what you can with it, but it's money. And in the Bayeux Tapestry, I actually have a picture of this in the book, from the Bayeux Tapestry, because in the margin of the Bayeux Tapestry, the famous shot where King Harold Godwinson is being killed, in the lower margin. Oh, look, there's the man got a picture of it. Yeah, in the lower margin, there's a guy ripping the gear off of a corpse and collecting that stuff. Yeah, that was reality. It was horrible.
So, as we all know, France unfortunately lost this battle, but they didn't necessarily win the war. It was very bad for, obviously, the French and the Genoese, but they still fought on. Why was that? I mean, obviously, they didn't call it the 100 Years' War, but why did this still sputter and go forward?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the French win the 100 Years' War. English don't like to be reminded of that. They're like, Crécy, Agincourt, yada, yada, yada. Well, the yada 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 is that the French win the war. A little thing called Joan of Arc happens, and the English lose this whole thing. Why does it continue for so long? Well, it continues for so long because the English won't give up the claim. I mean, really, is when it comes down to it, that's the issue. Because as long as they keep trying to push their claim, the English or the French are going to keep fighting back against it. The French don't want to hand over their country, so as long as the English keep pushing it, that's going to be the case. And the English are going to, keep pushing it because they think, or at least want to think, that it's theirs, and they want the money. They want, they want what this would mean. So yeah, it ends up just dragging on and on and on. There are pauses where the treaties are signed, and there's a break for a little bit, but then it'll just start right back up. It's by the end, it's two boxers in the 50th round, just got nothing left, just trying to get it done.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So I wrote this down because I knew I would probably butcher it, but chevauché, hopefully my French is correct. It's not the first time I've heard that. Is that what's going on here? Did Edward have a clear strategy of sort of raiding the area that didn't support his claim to the throne, and then eventually he got to Crecy, or was it a little bit more complicated than that?
So yeah, chevauché, you pronounced it correctly. Well done. A chevauché is a moving raid that is just punishing, just stripping the land. That is what he ends up doing. That's when he lands in France. I don't think that's what he's doing. He appears to be creating kind of like a beachhead. But as things transpire, that's what he ends up doing. Now, this is a campaign that actually shifts several times. One is that shift to chevauché, but because of what the French are doing, which, if I was to go back to that map, we could go over all that's in the map. But, at a certain point, the French cut off the English at the Seine. And it's a miracle that he gets across the Seine. From that point forward, he's just on the run. Edward III and the English are just simply on the run. They're trying to get away, and they get caught here. They don't have time to do a chevauché when they're just trying everything they can to keep ahead of the hounds on their tail. They're just running. So yeah, it depends on where you are in the campaign, what it is that Edward III is up to. But yeah, certainly part of it, he was performing a chevauché in at least part of it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Livingston. This was fantastic, and we're looking forward to your next book. Would you like to tell us what it's all about, maybe?
Well, the immediate next book, which comes out in a few weeks, is Origins of the Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time is a very famous fantasy series. I'm actually recording this sitting in the author's chair at his desk. I've written a book about the making of that series, how it was made, the man who made it. So that book is coming out on November 8th, which paperbacks of Never Greater Slaughter are coming out that same day. And then following that up, I've got another novel coming out. And then sometime next year, a book on the Battle of Agincourt is coming out. So looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you once again. We're looking forward to your newest books. And thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Take it easy.
Thank you all.